Trump's big, beautiful bill is back to the House and has either passed or is about to pass. We were literally just arguing about it seconds ago. It's definitely looking like it's going to pass today, and we're going to have a big, beautiful bill. We're looking at what's probably most likely the final version of it, the real version that we're going to have. And is it big? Definitely. Is it beautiful? That's to be determined. That's to be argued on this live stream. We are going to get into exactly everything that you need to know that's in it, and also two major changes that were made that I think make it much less beautiful than it was originally in the House. So stick around, find out what those are. All right, so we got a lot of details to get into, but just a quick play-by-play reminder for everybody. We have done one episode on this before where we discussed what the House passed, and then the House, of course, kicked it over to the Senate, and the Senate got their chance to add some things and tweak some things and change some things. They recently passed it just this week or early last week, and it has gone back to the House. And as I just said, we were just arguing, trying to figure out, has it already passed in the House? There's a little bit conflicting. Like they're voting on it right now live.
By the time you watch this video, it will have passed.
It definitely. By the time you were watching this video, it probably definitely 100% will have been passed. So we're treating it as if it's been passed, and that's what we're doing here. So we're gonna get into if you didn't see our last video, it's okay, because I'm gonna get into the biggest changes between the House and now, and also just the biggest elements that are in this bill. So before I open this up before I get into my analysis, just quick from any of the hosts, you all have any just killer comments that you're just dying to make about either the bill or the passing of it, or just any Republican drama happening in the House this week?
Here's my comment, and this is what I've been in conversation with my friends at the gym this week, because everybody's heard about the bill. Everybody's frustrated for one reason or another. On one side, what I'm hearing in the news is this is big, it's beautiful, it's going to do great things. And on the other side, I'm hearing this is the worst thing you've ever heard of in your life. It's so terrible, it's so bad. But there's no subtlety to either of those angles. And I'm like, that's what I'm hoping we get in today. What's the subtlety? Are there certain things in this bill that would have been passed no matter what, that had to happen, that we had to have in place, right? And if I'm running a household, there's certain things I have to pay for. So what here are we paying for that we had to versus what did we add that we didn't need? And I think giving people the actual details is going to matter.
So
Absolutely.
I think if we go middle of the road, that's not as shocking of a headline that people are going to click. So I'll say this is the most incredible bill we've ever seen ever. And it's also the worst bill we've ever seen ever. So we really need to unpack both of those today, and we'll end up landing somewhere in the middle.
No, we are going to unpack both of those. And Troy, if it makes you happy, I'll just spoil it right from the beginning and say my take on this bill is kind of meh. It's meh. It's all right. I mean, there are two major issues I have with this bill. I'm going to get into this, but there's two huge problems that were added by the Senate.
I was just going to say that's why we don't have Reese do the thumbnails for these shows, because meh doesn't really get people to click it. So,
but that is my expert amateur take on distilling the entire bill down to, is it really good? Is it really great? Ended up kind of being like, it's okay. It's okay. It's a mix.
I feel like I woke up this morning with the perfect illustration for what's happening with this bill right now. I'm going to save it for later, but I'm just going to tease that. I'm going to be sharing y'all let me know if you think it's the perfect illustration or not, but let's get into the details.
All right. Let's get into the good, bad, and the ugly. So starting off,
you destroyed my perfect illustration.
Wow. That was dramatic.
How did you do that?
It was so dramatic.
Nailed it. I thought something happened behind your camera or something there. I thought you were.
I was going to talk through the movie.
Somebody walked through the wall.
I was going to talk about the film with Clint Eastwood, and
you can still talk about the film. It'll make more sense later.
I have a feeling.
My mind. All right, let's get into the details.
All right,
that's funny.
Here is the breakdown. I've put it together another little Excel sheet. So this is my best sort of analysis and kind of combining numbers. And just a reminder, most of these numbers, of course, I'm getting from the Congressional Budget Office. which if you have a bone to pick with the Congressional Budget Office, then you might not like some of these numbers. I've heard some people say it's not really nonpartisan, and they have their own agenda and they tweak numbers, and whether that's true or not, I really have no idea. But these are the best numbers that I could find, and I do weigh them a little bit with what some people have criticized about the numbers or not criticized about the numbers. So we'll try to get into that just a hair. But so starting off right off the bat, this is the 10-year breakdown. The CBO has stated that this big, beautiful bill will add $3.3 trillion to the debt, national debt, over the next 10 years. So we're going to talk about the next 10 years, what the tax cuts looks like, and the spending cuts looks like, and the new spending looks like over the next 10 years. If you remember from the last one that we did, or if you're just familiar with the House, the one that passed in the House was $900 billion less expensive. So this bill, according to the CBO, is 900, almost a extra $1 trillion more expensive, adding almost $1 trillion more dollars to the national debt. The last one was, I guess, 2.4. This one's 3.3 trillion over the next 10 years. So what's the difference? Where does that extra $900 billion come from? Or go, I should say. Where does the extra $900 billion in debt come from? So the short summary is there's more tax cuts. There's less taxes, pretty good. But obviously less taxes, less revenue for the government. Then there's also reduced Green Deal spending cuts. So the House version cut the Green Deal, the new Green Deal, whatever it's called, Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. That was just basically a big green energy subsidies passage. This one does not cut that as much as the House version does. And it also adds a little bit of extra spending. So let's get into it. So the absolute biggest tax cuts are still from the 2017. I'm going to highlight this right here. The 2017 tax cuts that is on individuals and businesses. This is just left over from Trump's 2017 taxes. And this is going to expire at the end of the year if this bill isn't passed, which is definitely going to be passed. But this is still, out of that $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, this one is still the absolute biggest number that's there. Republicans like to brag that this is going to save us from having a 22% tax hike on families. And so if this wasn't passed by the end of this year, all those taxes would go back up, and there would definitely be a massive tax hike on Americans this year. A couple of things that were already in the House version I won't spend much time on is this also, we're going to be boosting standard deductions for seniors, which covers their kind of like they don't have to pay taxes on Social Security, but it's just a standard deduction. Is also boosting child deductions. We have no tax on tips, no tax on overtimes, and no taxes on certain car loan interests. And so that's all old hat at this point. That was in the House bill. So let's talk about the two new tax cuts, major tax cuts here. We have a new business tax cut. So this is 100% business expensing for new factories, equipment, and machinery. So this means that businesses get to write off more of their expenses. If they build a new factory, they pay for new equipment, they buy new machinery, they get to write that off. So that's just a straight up business expense cut.
Can I say so?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, so we used to have these big things called the farm bills, where that was a big thing for farmers that they could write off like $250,000 or $500,000 worth of equipment every year. And so they would basically show no income, because at the end of the year, it's like, do you want to give half of this to the government, or do you want to buy a new tractor? And so this is absolutely huge. And so when those went away, the tractor industry, the big, large ag equipment, saw a big hit. And so that's a big deal here. I would be interested to see we could go into some numbers on this, but that's a big deal for a company to decide whether or not they're going to buy a piece of equipment at the end of the year. If they got some money left over, rather than paying taxes on all that, let's just buy these couple $1 million pieces of equipment. Well, then obviously the people who are selling those equipment is going to have sales as well. And it's kind of a ripple effect. So that's a big deal. I hadn't seen that.
This is a big deal. And as a general proponent of capitalism and just lower taxes on the economy in general, I honestly think this is a huge plus. Obviously, if you're more left leaning, you're probably not going to like the cut in taxes on businesses, but I think that it is. I think it's generally a good thing for everybody. Lower taxes in general, speaking, is a good thing for everybody as long as your government can still sustain itself on the revenue it's pulling in.
And I did a whole episode about it 2 days ago on Tuesday about what could fix our debt problem right now. And one of the things that historically has fixed the debt problem was an economic boom. And another thing that's historically caused economic booms is lowering taxes, especially on businesses. So I'm not saying that businesses should not be paying taxes. I think they should. And Ryan pointed out sometimes they find a loophole and they end up paying no taxes through these cuts. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, like no taxes at all. But because then the government's not getting the revenue right at all. But I think lowering the taxes, what we've seen historically, could create economic boom, and economic boom can lower the debt. So that could potentially be a good thing.
And one thing I want to just say is anytime that we say the words, well, then the government's not going to have the revenue, and then the government's not going to, it's for me, all I hear is, well, then the government's not going to be able to spend money on interest because they have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. Right. Like that's what I hear. It's like enough with the excuses. You spend too much money. Stop with all the taxes to make up for your failure of managing money and debt. So that's my little, I have a much bigger rant on that, but I'm sure we can save that for later.
Yeah, well, we'll probably get into it a little bit more. My smallest pushback is if you're putting forth a bill that is cutting taxes, as you said, Ryan, then we also need to be fixing the spending problem. And I'm going to get into there is a little bit of a shortfall in this bill as far as fixing the spending problem. Because I 100% agree with you. 100% agree with you. We have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. We don't need more government revenue. I'm all for cutting taxes. We do have a spending problem. And that's the downsides of this bill, which we'll get into in a second. But before we hop to the spending problems that are definitely still in this bill, unfortunately, let's talk about this other tax. So this is one. I'm curious what you guys think about this, because this is actually probably one of my least favorite things. This is one of the two things that the Senate added that I think dramatically destroys this bill. I don't think it completely destroys the bill, but I think it makes the bill stink. When it could have been awesome, it makes the bill stink a lot more. And so here's one of the big ones. And this might be surprising to y'all because this is a tax cut, but I think it's a terrible tax cut. And I will explain why. So this is a tax cut. This is called a state and local taxes tax deduction, essentially. So what this is, it's SALT for short, state and local taxes. What this is it's a deduction on your income taxes. When you pay federal income taxes, you get to write off a portion of your taxes or a portion of your income that is spent paying for local taxes, for state taxes, for local city taxes, for county taxes, all those sorts of things, right? So what they did, this was already set to $10,000. So you could write off $10,000 of your income and not have to pay taxes on $10,000 to the federal government if you spent, again, 10 grand on local taxes, on SALT taxes, right? Now, what they did is the couple of the congressmen, or the senators, I should say, from states that have really high taxes got this boosted up. So they got this boosted up to $40,000 a year for the next 5 years. It expires and goes back to $10,000 after 5 years. But for the next 5 years, this is going to be at $40K. And so why do I think this is bad? I think this is bad because it mostly helps residents of high tax areas. This is not a tax cut for everybody. This is only a tax reduction for people from California and New York City, or just the most expensive, the places who have the most expensive local taxes. So what does that mean? Well, it means, in my opinion, it incentivizes states and cities and counties to raise taxes. Because think about it this way. If California, which has really high taxes, continues to raise their taxes, eventually the people living there are like, we can't pay these high state taxes and high federal taxes. So I have to go somewhere with lower state taxes, right? You can't get out of your federal taxes. So I'll get out of my state taxes. I'll move to states. I'll move to a city that's cheaper. I'll pay less taxes. However, with this being raised to $40,000 deduction for local taxes, now you don't have to move, because if your state raises your taxes, your total taxes don't go up. It just means you're now paying more to your state and paying less to the federal government. And some people might think that's a good idea because they like states more than the federal government. I understand that. But again, it incentivizes states and cities and counties. They're basically, if they don't raise taxes, they're just throwing away money at this point. Because they're like, if I raise taxes, it's not going to hurt any of my citizens. They're still paying the same amount in taxes. They're just paying more to me and less to the government. And so it actually, in my opinion, this incentivizes state and local taxes. Hopefully I explained this well enough that it's understandable.
Yeah. So
What do you guys think about this?
you're saying essentially it's a way for the states to steal revenue from the government, from the federal government. The people are paying the same taxes. They're just paying it now to the state instead of to the government, right?
Yes.
And so the more liberal states are going to take advantage of that because they're the ones that are going to benefit from it. That's what you're saying.
Yes, and they will benefit from it immediately because that 40K, the people in the more liberal states who maybe are thinking, "Hey, my state is taxing me way too much. I'm thinking about leaving." Well, for the next 5 years, they're going to stay, and they're going to keep paying those high taxes. And those taxes are because all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, actually, now my taxes went back down." Because I get a big write-off. I get a 40K write-off.
And the way the taxes went back down in that state was they stole those taxes from the federal government.
Exactly.
So essentially, they stole the taxes from the American people. And
yes, in one way of looking at it, yes. They stole it from the rest of, they stole it from the rest of the country in order for their
I wonder who put that into the bill. I wonder who put that in there.
It was like senators from states that just have like higher taxes and stuff.
Yeah.
And
And the rhinos.
Yeah. I was going to say
this one, I think this one is, for me, this one's horrendous. If you guys have a different perspective on it,
no, it's bad. It's bad. So my illustration earlier, Reese, was good, bad, and the ugly, right? You know who the good is in the film, Clint Eastwood. If y'all have ever seen that film, it feels like 6 hours of this guy walking around. He's fighting with the bad and he's putting up with the ugly. And you keep wondering, why does he keep putting up with the ugly, right? And you also realize he's not as good as all that. At the end, it's like he's not that good. He's just gooder than the rest. Pardon my French.
Gooder.
So
wow.
No good.
Yeah, he's just gooder than the rest, right? If that were a word. But at the end of it, you realize he has paid a heavy price for not being more wary of what the bad is doing and for putting up and tolerating what the ugly is doing. He paid a heavy price for it at the end.
Yeah.
And a lot of his problems came from, well, whatever. He's just like letting the ugly do whatever the heck he wants. And he caused all these problems. Anyways, the point being, he's to blame for some of it too. Like that's the problem. So I think this started out good and we added a lot of bad to it. And then, now it's ugly as heck, and the problem is, well, there's a lot of people there that should have done something about it that didn't. That's my take on it. So y'all let me know what you think. I don't know. Maybe the illustration's not that great, but I thought it was good. I woke up thinking about that movie. So
I don't know. For me, I think that's a pretty good take on it. I think it's par for the course where you think, hey, finally they're fighting for us and they're doing this and this and this. And then it's kind of like they get to the 5-yard line and we're all celebrating. And then it's like the switch. And then it's like, oh, okay, now, yeah, this is absurd. Like, this is ridiculous. So, I mean, I think that's I think that makes sense.
Now, I think there's still some good in it because I'm looking at the 100% business expenses for new factories, equipment, machinery. I'm looking at that and I have a hopeful perspective. I'm looking historically at cutting the taxes and saying that could create an economic boom and we could actually generate more revenue than people are thinking, because a lot of these tax cuts, all they're doing is they're looking at on paper what it says right now instead of what it could produce over the next 10 years, so it could produce an economic boom, but I'm not saying it will, but we're going to have to look back in 10 years and see if it actually did or not, like that's the problem. And to get some of the good things in there, we had to put a lot of bad in there. And that's when it gets really ugly. And that's the point is that it's really not great.
No, I agree with you. To push back against a little bit of the negativity, we're still looking at $4.5 trillion in tax cuts. Only a smaller percentage of these are the tax cuts that I really hate, the state and local taxes, which I don't personally see as a tax cut to the people. I just see it as a shifting in a way for states to continue to raise higher taxes and just moving that money away from the federal government to liberal states. I'm not a big fan of that, or states that have unduly high taxes, whether they're liberal or not. That's whatever. So I'm not a big fan of that. But again, we're still looking at 4.5 trillion in tax cuts. So I'm moving on from the tax cuts, but real fast before we get into the savings that is also in this bill. I just want to point out that I'm not using the Senate Republicans math here. So Senate Republicans, they were doing a little bit of a what their critics or Democrats were calling magic math. And what they were doing is they were not counting the 2017 tax cut extensions. That's the biggest tax cuts here. They weren't counting that in as far as like adding to the debt. And so because those have been around since 2017. So they're like, oh, we're not adding anything new. We're just extending it. So if you go by their magic math, the bill actually reduces debt by 500 billion in the next 10 years, which sounds really good if you go by their magic math. But a little reality check there, the bill also raises the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. And so if it was in fact actually reducing debt by 5 billion in the next 10 years, 500 billion in the next 10 years, there wouldn't be a reason for them also to include, oh, by the way, we also need to raise the debt ceiling by 5 trillion, just in case. So that's that. So
from what I understand though, on the debt ceiling front, it's and I don't know the exact details of this, but it's actually raising the debt ceiling because of commitments we already have that are going to come into play, and 500 billion isn't going to really hit that very hard, unfortunately. So the hope is that the debt ceiling has to be raised, or something's going to it's going to all come crashing down, the entire economy, because we won't be able to pay things we've already committed to. And so that's a whole different angle on it. I think that it's just important to point out that the debt ceiling is being raised because of previous commitments, not because we're trying to spend more money on top of what's already happening. I don't like that. I'm not trying to defend it, but that is the case with that.
Yeah. And I think you're right. We'll get into this $3.3 trillion debt over the next 10 years. We'll get into this number, and because I don't think it's going to be quite so bad. Again, even as the CBO is saying, I understand their math, but we'll get into some of the things that offset it here in a little bit. But I just wanted to point that out. So if you hear Republicans being like, "Oh, this isn't going to add any debt," it's like, well, they're most likely using the math of we're just extending the 2017 tax cuts, so we're not counting that. But it's still, you still have to calculate that into the fact of, again, Ryan's not going to like my language here, but the revenue shortfall. You're extending these tax cuts. That is less taxes that were projected to be brought in by the government. So revenue shortfall, we still have to make up for that in some way. So let's get into the savings. So from my analysis, so again, there was a $900 billion difference between the House version and now this new Senate version. That's now the final version that's being passed. My analysis, most of that $900 billion shortfall came from the Senate, unfortunately, cutting out some of the savings that the House made, and then the Senate just kind of cut them back. And so we'll get into that. So the biggest savings we're getting, this is pretty much the same as it was before, almost $1 trillion, $1 trillion if you count Medicare savings, but almost $1 trillion in Medicaid spending is being cut. And I know we talked about this before. Everybody on the left is saying that this is going to be the worst thing ever. But the last time that we did the analysis on this, again, we're saying that most of this cutting actually comes from removing waste, fraud, and abuse, removing illegal immigrants. And we also are putting work requirements for people who are able-bodied adults without dependents. So we could get into 80 hours per month.
Yeah, that's
work or education or service. And so we're looking at actually cutting a lot of what I would say waste, fraud, and abuse, more than cutting vulnerable people's healthcare who desperately need it. But I mean,
and I would say just stating that as a channel, and as and for myself personally, just based on some of the comments that I've seen so far in this live stream and previously, that would be my hope as well. Is that we're able to help those who actually need the help, and that we're able to cut the fraud and the waste. We're able to essentially root out and weed out the people that are taking advantage of it, that don't actually need the help. Because there's a lot of people, unfortunately, in our society today that are just looking to, get squeeze off, and squeeze the government like a sponge and get a little bit off the top from the American people that don't actually need the help. They could be working, they could be providing for themselves, and they're not. So that would be our hope, is that
I want to underscore that, because this is something that there's also something called the welfare cliff, which actually makes it a trap to be on welfare, where people can't, if they earn a little bit more per hour, they can't qualify for certain benefits. And so that's a whole nother issue that some states are addressing. But I would agree with this. This is not it. They take an example of a potential person maybe losing benefits that really needs it, and then they magnify it like that's the whole picture of what's going to happen. That is not at all what's going to happen. And in fact, a lot of this fraud and abuse, and whether it's fraud and abuse or just a matter of, well, that's what we can do, so that's what we're going to do. I mean, that's kind of maybe that's just more of the abuse, but it's not. It's not the intention of it. And the intention was of some, I think, was to get more people on there, to be more dependent on the government, and that's more control. That's more. I mean, that's the whole idea behind it. And so this is something that we need to not understate. But for sure, this is not about getting out of people's hands that really need it. This is about eliminating it where it's not needed, and where we can have that savings where it's just not necessary. And those people then get into the workforce. And so that's a whole nother topic there as well.
Absolutely. And to underscore that even more, I don't know if y'all saw the news, but recently the Department of Justice just busted a ring of people that were defrauding the government with fake healthcare claims that totaled $14 billion that they stole.
Dang.
And this was just one group that was recently busted. You can look this up, and it's just like, if we can get into that even more, just think of that $14 billion right there from just one bust. And it's just like, think about the billions of dollars that can be saved for really rooting out that sort of waste, fraud, and abuse, and things, of course, like illegal immigrants, taking advantage of some of this stuff. People that, again, these work requirements is like fully able adults who don't have any dependents, who are just like, why they shouldn't be on this to begin with. We probably should at some point spend an entire episode talking about healthcare. I know we've done like a one in the past. I think that's for members only. But
me and my wife have we've actually been trying to uncover a health provider fraud happening right here in our hometown.
Really?
I would love to do that. Yeah, I would love to do that. And that's just through talking to our friends and the experiences they've had there, and then putting two and two together and like being like, oh, y'all never got billed? Y'all never got billed? Like, y'all never got billed either? Like, there's something's going on here. There's something. And so there's a lot of fraud that's happening in the healthcare industry, unfortunately. And
there's a lot to talk about because the system is so broken.
Right. There's a lot of good,
so broken, and it hemorrhages so much money. It's
and I really need to save that for another episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. There's also up billing and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we could definitely unpack that.
I know that's going to be a whole. People may not agree on our assessment at the moment, but I will, again, I say this entire system is super, super broken, and I'm all for somebody trying to at least reduce waste, fraud, and abuse. But eventually, we're probably gonna have to get to the point of reworking healthcare in the United States, because on every front, it's a little bit of a mess. But that's not a big change from the House bill. This is the biggest change from the House bill, and this is the second thing that I think the Senate really shot themselves in the foot, shot Americans in the foot. This is the big, the ugly. This is the change, the bad. This is the change that really occurred that I just think really, really stinks, unfortunately. So they are going to save, this might sound great, $488 billion by eliminating Biden's Green New Deal tax cuts. This is actually good. This is a great statement. They're going to save money because this comes from the Green New Deal, otherwise known as the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, that was passed in 2022, that was going to cost the United States $2 trillion by 2034. And we've talked about this green energy stuff for a long time, how it's really not as green as it claims to be. The green energy, the solar, the wind, the batteries, all that is really inefficient. It actually causes a lot of pollution. And we are hurting ourselves by now having to buy energy from other countries when we could be self-sufficient on nuclear power and also on fossil fuels. So we could talk about that all day. But if you believe that this should be cut, which I absolutely do believe it should be cut, well, the bad news is the House version was much better because the Senate version watered down some of the House's cuts and extended some of the subsidies, which means that the House estimates were we were going to cut $1 trillion. And now we're only cutting half of that. So that is where most of that $900 billion difference comes from. Is we
Wow.
were cutting $1 trillion from this $2 trillion program over the next 10 years. Now we're only cutting $500 billion, a little bit less than $500 billion. And so that's honestly, this is my biggest problem with the bill is it doesn't cut these enough. And it doesn't cut them quick enough. Even the $1 trillion cuts that the House was doing, which was fantastic, I think could have been better. I think we could have cut them off even sooner because there's no reason that the government should be subsidizing this private industry of solar and wind and these green energy that's like they can compete on their own. They have, they have merits for existing, sure, but they can compete on their own. And the government is just hemorrhaging money, throwing tax cuts and subsidies their way. So this is my biggest qualm with the bill is we just lost ourselves $500 billion right there because the Senate was like, this is too much cutting here. And they had to dial it back.
Who did that though? Was it a compromise?
I think I feel like they got pressured just too badly by green energy lobbyists, I'm sure. But I could be wrong. It could be some kind of compromise of some kind. But I don't know what the compromise would be, to be honest, because this was a bit of a cut. And I really think it was just some tweaking of like, well, this is going to be too harsh. People are going to like have contracts with the government and stuff like that. And so let's extend it. Let's extend it a little bit more, There was just enough language change that was like, wait a second, we just extended this quite a bit, which means it literally just reduced the savings that we were going to have by half. So I don't know. I don't know the full analysis on why the Senate chose to do this. I just have speculation, but those are the numbers. So that's where most of this comes from, unfortunately.
So this was the Senate's fault, and that's what you're saying?
This is the Senate's fault. The House was cutting $1 trillion.
From the perspective of who's the good, the bad, and the ugly, the bad is the Senate here. Senator Palpatine. So we have a video of my nephew and niece when they were very young. She had just watched. She was old. She's a little older than her brother. She had just watched the first movie that she had ever seen with a real bad guy in it, and she was like, bad guy on the screen or whatever, bad guy, yeah. And her parents were like, oh, she grasped the concept of what a bad guy is. And then after the film, they tried to get her to say it again. They were like, did you see a bad guy in that movie? And then she turns to her brother, who's younger than her, like a toddler, like waddling up, and she goes, bad guy. And then they laughed and everything. But it's just this idea of, in films nowadays, they play the bad music, the dun, 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 dun. When the bad guy comes in, immediately your brain goes, bad guy, So that's what I'm looking for here in this equation is where's the bad guy? And I mean, I think we just found it. Like,
are you saying we need a soundtrack for
the Senate? Like
that way people know whether they're supposed to
we need
feel.
to play Emperor Palpatine's music, on the Senate floor as a stunt, and we'll all get added to the January 6th prison cell when we do that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have the enough of the analysis on like who was the one who pressured this and pushed this through. I was mainly caught up on the like the language change and stuff like that, but essentially it was cutting of or they cut back a lot of the expiration dates that were supposed to occur. Like this time it's going to cut off. We're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to pay for that anymore. And they just kind of reeled it in just a little bit. But yeah, this is the biggest one where I'm like, we could have saved another $500 billion. And we could have saved there were some estimates again of the Green New Deal. If we went all the way, we could have saved ourselves an additional $1 trillion on top of what the House was saving. I wish they would have gone in that direction. But for some reason, even many Republicans are still married to the idea that the government needs to be shelling out money for the green energy economy. So
I have a question for you though, Reese.
What?
Let's just kind of assume for a moment that it was a type of compromise for whatever reasons, right? In comparison to all the other savings and such in the bill, would it be worth it, you think, to have cut in order to pass? Like, let's say the scenario is the bill maybe never would have passed if we had kept the $1 trillion cut, but because a compromise was made, it was more likely to pass, losing out on that 500 billion savings, but then the rest of the bill makes up for that. Is that a valid?
I kind of get what you're saying. I would my general take is And again, my full summary of this bill, even though I'm saying meh, I would say that's on the positive side more on the negative side, because again, we're looking at tax cuts and we are looking at saving money. We're saving money in Medicaid spending. This is new savings that we would not have had if this bill did not pass. We are cutting $500 billion in the Green New Deal, and that is $500 billion in savings that we wouldn't have otherwise. And also, again, most of the tax cuts, even though it lowers the revenue for the United States government, I generally believe in tax cuts, and I generally think that's a good thing for Americans, for businesses, for the economy, and in the long run, should help to, further promote new ways of gathering taxes off of lots of prosperous businesses instead of just raising taxes really, really high on a few people, which is how civilizations prosper, historically speaking, is when you gather smaller amounts of taxes from lots of prosperous businesses and enterprises and people instead of really high taxes on a smaller and smaller number of people that you're able to tax. And so in that general, kind of way, I'd say, yeah, it is better. It's a better, if they had to compromise for this, it is better. But I have to compare it to the House bill, and compared to the House bill, it kind of sucks.
Mhm.
Yes. One thing that we haven't talked about, and I can go into it real quick if you want, or we can do it a little later, is the funding for Planned Parenthood. And that's
you can talk
something
about it right now. Actually, let's get into the funding right now, actually, because I think we've hit this the savings enough. These are the same. There's no change. We got a few $100 billion for overhauling the student loan programs. This is in savings, and some savings in SNAP benefits. We talked about this last time, so I'm not going to get into it because there's no change. But let's talk about some of the spending. Oh, I guess that actually that is one of the cuts. So yeah. So Ryan, go ahead and talk to us about the that cut that you wanted to talk
about. So this basically, it doesn't 100% defund, but it nearly 100% defunds, as far as I understand it, Planned Parenthood. So Planned Parenthood, abortion provider, they do 35% of the abortions, killing unborn babies in the US, 35%. So that's over, I think, 350,000 annually, 350,000 deaths annually. And so they get between 500 to 700 million per year from Medicaid reimbursements. This ends that. None, like zero. And so then they get another 60 million per year from Title X family planning grants. And so that is the total government funding accounts for 40 to 43% of Planned Parenthood's revenue. And so they try to say that, well, abortion is only 3% of what they do. But the way they do that is every woman who comes in for an abortion also gets an STI test, also gets a pregnancy test, also gets family planning consult, whatever. And that just takes it down. But the truth is, up to, I think, around 50% of their revenue is from abortions. And so there's, I think, around 700 of these so-called health clinics, these Planned Parenthood mills around the US. And I think this would lead to closing around 200 of them. Wow. And so that's significant. And so for me, that by itself, whatever you got to do, let's go ahead and get this passed, because we need to defund that. So part of me is like, I don't care what garbage else. I mean, there's other things, but for me, that's the number one thing that needs to go. Is now we've got a life, it's going to actually say, like, think about this. We look at numbers, but actually it is a person that will now get to live. And and so they don't do, and this isn't a bash Planned Parenthood thing, but I will do that every chance I get. But this is, they don't do adoption services. They don't do family planning. They don't do any of this. It's all a facade. And so if you look at actually how they started and where they were targeting to put them, it's actually a very racist organization, and eugenics and all kind of stuff like that. So that's great news. So for that reason by itself, I would probably celebrate having this bill go through. Some of those, I think I didn't get into so much detail on why this is the case, but I think it just pushes out where they, for like a year, I think it's 12 months or something, that they can't do these Medicaid reimbursements. So I don't know why that would be the case, but I need to dive into that a little bit more. But there's also, where states can actually elect this. Then the Supreme Court also talked about this. States can elect to not reimburse them for Medicaid and all these kinds of things as well. So that is there's no right to reimbursement, basically, is what they said. So that would be my soapbox for that.
Incredible.
I want to say something on that, just a real quick little thing that I think is encouraging on the Planned Parenthood front, cutting all of that. This is speculative from a worldly perspective, which is not how we think, right? But doing that alone, this country will be blessed. I guarantee it. Getting rid of all of that on a biblical basis, that's not speculative, that's a promise. This country will be blessed because of removing that possibility. We are no longer putting our stamp of approval on the killing of unborn children. We will be blessed because of that. We'll see how that blessing comes about, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, amen to that. And I want to give an example. Okay, so imagine we got you guys are from Texas, so we got a Texas Roadhouse, we got a steak restaurant, and they serve 3 steak dinners. But what they say is, hey, make sure you bring everybody at that table 4 or 5 cups of water during their steak dinner, because then we're going to make sure that everybody knows only 3% of what we do is steak dinners. We want to make sure that they know we exist to serve water. We exist to serve water to people. That's exactly what this is.
The only problem with that illustration, Ryan, is that I would never eat at Texas Roadhouse. So.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. Okay. So let's go to a Brazilian steakhouse. That's my kind of meat. That's my kind of food. And we'll go to a Brazilian steakhouse, all you can eat. Yeah.
No, it makes absolutely sense.
We're at Texas Day Brazil.
Yeah. I have no comment on that. Y'all did an incredible breakdown. That is definitely one of the best things. I'm glad that you got into that, because I wasn't going to get into that, because I was mainly getting into what costs and saves the most money, because I was in the money mind frame. So I love that you guys got into that, because the cutting of, even though it is like millions and millions of dollars, it's still like just an item line on this bill as far as the cuts that are going to go to Planned Parenthood. But the lives that will save obviously is untold and absolutely priceless. So getting through just the rest of my little bit of analysis here, we're going to talk about the new spending. So from the previous, the House bill now to the Senate bill that just passed, what is the brand new spending? We already had the near $50 billion in the border wall, but the Senate added almost another $50 billion, $45 billion to immigration custom enforcements for the detention of illegal immigrants. So as far as I understand, this is essentially building detention centers for holding people temporarily as they come across the border or coming into customs. So this basically allows us, if you don't have the capacity to hold people, then you for at least for a little bit before you turn them around or figure out why they're here and send them away, they basically end up just slipping into the United States. So this is kind of like further border enforcement, so probably worth it. We've talked
about going to Alligator Alcatraz.
Say what?
It's not going to Alligator Alcatraz.
I don't know. I vaguely remember the Alcatraz thing, but I honestly don't know. This is a brand new spending. This got slipped in, $50 billion to fund rural hospitals over the next 5 years. I don't know too much about this, other than I think that this was a little bit of this was the compromise for cutting all the Medicaid spending. It was people were like, well, this is going to hurt people. People are going to have less resources. And they're like, well, here we'll compromise. We'll throw some money at rural hospitals that are usually underfunded. And so we'll give them $50 billion for the next 5 years. So those are the new ones. Everything else in here, $150 billion to defense was already there. $10 billion to Mars. I don't think that's new. I think that was already there.
Wait, explain that one. I didn't know that. What's that?
$10 billion. They're just we're going to Mars, man. $10 billion.
Well, okay, hold on. What organization is this going to?
Yes, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know. You have to look that one up. This was just one little line on my sheet.
Okay, this is.
I mainly
what's the justification for that? I just wonder what.
Doug, let's do a separate episode about that, because that's interesting.
Yeah.
So that's the new. So real
$5 billion of it is going to NASA, $5 billion to Elon Musk, and then they're going to compete. Whoever can get there first.
All 10 billion are going straight. I would be shocked if 10 billion was going straight to Elon Musk, considering the recent feud with Elon Musk and Trump. But that's a little side note here. So let's talk about getting down to the good, bad, and the ugly. How bad is this going to be? So I did this last time, so I'm redoing it here again. So 10 years is hard to think about. So let's do the 1 year breakdown. So 3.3 trillion deficit over the next 10 years. We're looking at this bill is going to cost $330 billion a year. When I say cost, I mean this is our shortfall right now. So for the next 10 years, we are short $330 billion. And so that looks pretty bad. However, this isn't everything that Trump is doing. We've talked about this before. We have a few different ways that we're making money right now we haven't done before. One, we have Doge savings. As far as I know, the Doge savings are so far this year, still around $170 billion just for this year. I just talked to you guys about a $14 billion fraud ring that just got busted the other day. That just happened. And so, our current administration is in the mood for busting fraud and abuse. So there's potential this number could continue to rise, right? We've got $50 billion extra dollars in tariffs that have been gathered this year. So if this same amount gets gathered for the rest of the year, then we get another $50 billion extra in tariffs. So this is new for this administration. And this is the fun one that Troy reminded me of, I think. We are now selling Visa Gold cards to people. They're $5 million each. And it's so I say Visa. I meant, Visa, like a Visa to get into the United States. Yeah. Make it sound like a credit card.
Yeah.
It's not a credit card. This is a travel visa for foreigners to come to the United States. They still get vetted. They still have to be determined to be safe. But if you pay $5 million, you have basically a lifelong visa to come to the United States, as long as you don't do something bad and get it revoked. And we raised $5 billion the first day opening up, selling these things. And the total amount we could raise.
That's the claim anyways.
That's the claim. And the claim is where the total amount we can raise on this is potentially as high as $50 trillion. And that would mean that we would have 10 million people purchase these things out of 37 million people around the globe who have enough money to purchase them, who are not U.S. citizens, who would be willing to be like, oh, this would be good. So if 10 million of those people, that would be a lot, honestly, of people obviously purchasing it. But so 50 trillion is the absolute max, right? So far, 5 billion. So if we sell any more of these, we might make up for it. And where does this leave us? This leaves us where, again, 330 billion shortfall for this bill. Now we have a shortfall of 105 billion left to pay for the rest of this year. Again, this bill is more expensive than the last one. So compare that to my last analysis. The House version, we would have only had to pay off $12 more billion, easily paid off, $12 more billion for the rest of this year. We're going to get another 50 billion in tariffs easily. That's like 2 of these Visa Gold cards, and we just paid that off, right? But unfortunately, as I said, we cut a lot of the spending cuts. We reduced a lot of the spending cuts. So we're still looking at a $105 billion shortfall. If we raise more tariffs, then that cuts in half, and now we only have a $50 billion shortfall. So I'll just finish up here. But basically, the bright side is, we still have half a year of tariffs we can gather. We have more Doge savings we could cut. We could cut 170 billion this year already. So we cut another $100 billion in government waste. We can pay for this. We have the gold cards, like I mentioned. The dark side, though, is even if we pay for the $105 billion shortfall that we're doing every year now, that still doesn't address the ongoing debt problem, which is that we have to pay almost $600 billion in interest every year. And that's just interest that we're just paying every single year. And so this is just keeping us from going into more debt and increasing the interest. This bill is not going to address the current debt problem. That will have to be addressed some other way. What's y'all's take on this?
Yeah, I would say I think it's pointing out the bigger problem. And I think what you landed on, Reese, really is the major issue, is that one of the things people were complaining about this bill was they were saying this is accelerating the Social Security and Medicaid insolvency issue by 1 year. So they're saying we had until 2033 to figure this out before Social Security and Medicaid go so bad they're out of control and we can't fix it, right? We won't have enough money to even run the government and pay for these things. And they're saying now we have only until 2032. And in my mind, I'm like, who cares if we lost a year there? The problem is so big that we have to solve it. 2033 versus 2032, 1 year less. Who cares? Like people are looking at the small problem versus the big problem. And I think this bill, honestly, is just pointing out the big problem is that we need to figure out the debt problem. If you look at what Biden did, 4.7 trillion in net new 10-year debt was approved by President Biden during his administration, during his 4 years. And that was 6.6 trillion a deficit altogether minus a 1.9 trillion of deficit reducing decisions. So 4.7 trillion in one 4-year presidential term, right? In my mind, at least President Trump is starting all of these initiatives to actually make the government more money, and he's having all these ideas like the visa program, the tariffs program. As much as people don't like that, at the same time, we have a bigger issue looming, and we've got to fix it. We've got to address it, and President Trump is trying to address that. And this is, yes, a spending bill, but at the same time, some of this is stuff. If I would reduce it down to my household and say, me versus my wife, I'm the saver, she's the spender, typically speaking, right? But she does a really good job at managing her budget. And so I can't get mad at her I can't go, what's this $50 purchase on the debit card this month? And she goes, well, that's clothing for our kids. If I didn't buy that, they would not have clothing. I can't go, you spent $50, like I have to say, okay, well, we had to buy that, right? Like, it doesn't matter which one of us, it's not her. She's not responsible for that versus I'm responsible for that. Our kids needed clothes. You know what I mean? So there are some things that you have to spend money on. And we see some of that here. And then there's other things. So like sometimes I spend $100 and I'm like, man, I feel bad because I spent $100. But what was the $100 on? I was buying a new piece of equipment that was going to help me with my job and potentially make more money, right? And so there's other things you spend money on that could potentially make more money. And then there's that third category of things that we're spending money on that are just out of control, ridiculous, you don't need, and they're waste. And that's the bigger problem that we need to solve as a nation. And I'm taking a household income and budget to kind of paint that picture, but it's like we're having that same problem as a nation. And I think this bill is pointing to the bigger looming issue, and we need to figure out a way to solve it.
Absolutely. And I'm just gonna point out, I'm not gonna get into any of these numbers, but I left them on the screen at the moment. And I'll have this, people can follow this link. We'll put the description to this spreadsheet if people are curious and want to look at the US debt problem that I have lined out down here. But I got the numbers for the how much we're in debt, what the deficit is every year, and then of course the biggest expenses, where most of all of this spending goes. And as I pointed out, a good 14% of it is literally just going to pay interest payments. And so that's obviously a massive issue. So
and a household, think about if you were living in a household, you had credit card debt, student loan debt, vehicle debt, all this stuff, and 14% of your income was just going to pay your interest payments. Like that would be ridiculous. That'd be ridiculous. We need to fix that. We need to fix that problem.
This is that's a fundamental thing. And I think you made a good point to where some of the things in this bill is getting at addressing some fundamental, additional revenue and that sort of thing. There's, it also, you talked a little bit about how it addresses some of the climate stuff and that garbage and the Inflation Reduction Act, but this makes it the permitting process and for drilling and all of that easier. There's other thing, for energy independence and less reliance on foreign oil and energy and that sort of thing. So that's another aspect of this. I think that is a foundational thing that should be going forward. And the other thing is that what you talked about, the 100% business expenses. I mean, that when you can expense something that increases cash flow, then you have more construction projects, you have expansion, you have hiring, you have all this that's needed to support new capabilities. And so, and what they're doing. And so that's another thing that I'd be interested to dive, more into that, separate from this conversation, just to see how much that actually affects GDP and all that sort of thing, long run. But those are structural type changes that I think are needed. And so the other thing is, I still think we need to do Warren Buffett's idea that says nobody's eligible for re-election without a balanced budget.
No, absolutely. I mean, just a few quick points. You're absolutely right about I want to know what the next 10 years is going to look like with with that new business tax. And we need that kind of economic boom. And this is, a little bit of the bright side again, is new tax revenue coming from this bill. Well, like you said, it's going to increase drilling and mining on public lands. So that's new tax revenue right there. That's not taking into account this whole $105 billion shortfall I'm talking about here per year. That doesn't take into account what new taxes we're going to get from drilling on drilling on public lands. And it also doesn't take into account the potential economic growth that can happen due to the cutting of the $4.5 billion in taxes that we're doing and the increase 700 something. I think that number might be wrong, but from the last one, but the $4.5 billion that we're cutting in taxes, that could lead to greater trillion, sorry, 4.5 trillion we're cutting in taxes over 10 years. My goodness, can lead to greater economic growth. And so economy grows, the tax base grows, right? And so that also is not being taken into account for these calculations as well. And that's partially because that is almost impossible to completely predict properly. But I think history shows us that it is, it does help for economic growth. So that is my final analysis of all of this. Again, this is why I kind of ended up being like, meh. Like, is it good? Yeah, it's good. Y'all pointed out some really good things. The cutting to Planned Parenthood probably is going to be one of my number one takeaways after this, because I just think ending abortion in the United States is definitely top priority. The debt crisis is still obviously looming, massively looming, and we're still going to have to figure out some way to take care of the $1 trillion we spend on healthcare every year, and the almost $1 trillion on Social Security. And of course, that's a whole nother conversation, on Social Security, because that's a little bit different. But definitely the healthcare, that's massive spending. Most of our spending is there. The interest payments. And as one of my friends always says, the government is a healthcare business that owns an army, because most of our spending is on healthcare. And then we also have, besides the interest in Social Security, most of it is on defense as well. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. And we have to figure out, how do we end up with a government that still works, that is not increasingly in debt because of this problem that's going to be that we're going to run into pretty soon. So any more final comments on the bill, the debt, any analysis that we've hit up here before maybe we move on to something else?
There's a couple things I would just want to point out as well that we didn't talk about yet. And one is international tax changes. So huge multinational corporations, big Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies make money overseas, but they're based in the US, but they don't bring that money back because of the harsh tax penalties. And so they don't reinvest that money in the US. They don't use it here. And so another thing this does is changes the foreign income tax rules for multinational corporations, which incentivizes them to bring those profits back to the U.S. and invest them here. So that's a whole nother thing that we can talk about, that I think we can do a lot here to get companies to do that. Trump in his first term talked about a tax holiday or whatever, repatriation of those profits. And so this takes a step in that direction, which is a big thing. The other one we didn't talk about is infrastructure and border spending, border security. So I think there's $46 billion for border and wall construction, and then ICE operations to expand those. Maybe you did talk about that. And then
I showed the numbers, but we didn't really discuss it too much.
I just wanted to make sure
almost $50 billion in a border wall for the next 10 years, and we have like another $50 billion in
defense and infrastructure, and military,
new border agents,
infrastructure modernization, Golden Dome, that sort of thing. So I wanted to make sure everybody caught that, since we didn't talk about it.
And that you just reminded me of one of my other points about this omnibus spending bill. It's so difficult to discuss every single thing in this bill, because I'm just going through like, what's the biggest billion-dollar numbers? But you're throwing out some things, like you even just talking about trying to bring tax revenue back from overseas. If that's in this bill, I didn't even have time to see that or read that. Right, this bill again was over the Senate, the House version was like over 1,000 pages. The Senate cut it down to like 888 or something like that, somewhere around 900 pages. Again, we talked about this in the last episode where we discussed the omnibus spending bill, but essentially, if we could get to where we, what's the bill that people want to pass, or the amendment, like one topic at a time? Bill, if we could get
change
to that,
the government like crazy,
that would be incredible. I mean,
if we could get to that, it would allow it would really help us out on these sort of analysis, because it would allow us to say this bill is about this one topic. So let's discuss this one topic and see what's specifically in this bill. This one, 800 pages. I mean, the House reps who are voting on it now, there's no way they had time in 2 days to read 888 pages. They probably don't even know what's in this thing. And I would say the same for the senators.
And let me just say this real quick. So it helps with transparency, helps with accountability. It stops pork barrel spending. It limits lobbyist influence. This is for people who can research it more. It restores constitutional intent, which is a big thing, and it increases legislative efficiency over time, which is an argument. People make the opposite argument, but it's not true. And it's realistic because it is already law in most states. Over 40 states do it that way. And it's also it's one subject at a time. It's called, I think it's One Subject at a Time Act. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's been through multiple times through Congress. It has growing public support. It's different. It's perfect for populist momentum, and it makes good politics. So you can't just go after these other people because of, oh, they spent this and they wanted to do that, but really they were voting for this other thing. And it's just, it all around gets to the intent and accountability and transparency, the intent, original constitutional intent. So we need that 100% full stop. There's no real good reason against that.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome. And I think that would help to distinguish the difference between we're representing the American people by doing this one thing, but also we let all these other pork barrels into the door, versus, no, this is what the people want. We're going to push for it. We're going to fight for it. If we don't get it, that's because the other politicians fought against it,
take a position on everything publicly.
Yeah, we're going to take a position on it. And I think for me, that is like, even this bill itself, I think my question would be, and this is my closing thought. And then I'm gonna let Doug tease tomorrow's episode, July 4th special. But this is my thought, is that like there's a term called financial dysmorphia, if I'm saying the term right. And essentially it is you feel less poor than you really are. You feel like you're doing less, not as well financially than you really are. And it's because you're looking at how other people are living and what they've got. And the problem is, they might be in debt to have what they have. And so you might be even misperceiving how rich they are, right? And this has been exacerbated by social media nowadays. So people get on, the stats say, the longer you spend time on social media, the less poor you feel, even if your financial situation did not change. This is called financial dysmorphia. So my question is, what government is our government looking at and feeling financial dysmorphia from? What are they like? Is there like a look at all these different congresses around the world, like they're so rich, funny. They're spending so much money, and it's like, and to me, I'm like, is the problem, and I don't want to put a weight on people's shoulders, but is the problem more ingrained in the American culture than just, oh, well, our politicians are not doing what we want, right? Or is the solution to fix the way they pass legislation, like Ryan's saying, to do something like a one topic or one subject bill act? Like, is that the solution? Because then we could actually say, hey, we could pressure our politicians more, and they don't have the excuses for passing things we don't like. It's they either did what we wanted or they didn't, But in this case, I'm looking at it, I'm saying, at what point is the American public going to storm the Capitol building, and say, stop doing bad government, we're not representing our interests,
we are not condoning storming any buildings. I just want to make that clear.
We're not just sort of January 6th thing, but it was already in my mind because I made that joke earlier. But you know what I mean? It's like what are y'all doing?
But let's think about this.
We the people, are supposed to be running this government, and you're not representing our interests. So
so think about this. An uninformed and unengaged electorate is the root cause of these issues. It is not because we need term limits. It is not because of all those facade of what the real issue is. The issue is unengaged, uninformed electorate. Now, everybody watching this show is a part of that 10% that is engaged and is informed. But the thing is, if we don't demand it, it's not gonna change, because the people in office want that, because then they have what they need for their campaign video and to get reelected, and to tell the people that are giving them money they can do that, and at the same time pass all this other garbage that keeps them friends and keeps them going to these cool parties and keeps them get all this stuff that is not the reason they were elected. So it's kind of both and so a lot of politicians probably want that, and so that's where we need to be holding them accountable for it.
Well, my point is, like, as the American public, we need to get over our financial dysmorphia so that we can clearly see how to correct our legislators, and say, nope, that's not what we want. Like, we what can we do with what we've got, instead of, just keep raising the debt ceiling. All right, Doug, you want to tease tomorrow's episode?
Yeah. So we had originally planned to do this at the end of this episode, but two factors played into that. Number one, I think we've talked quite a bit already. And number two, man, Reese, pointing out that what was it, 500 billion to Mars?
No, it's
10 billion. No, it was only 10 billion to Mars.
10 billion, billions of dollars. We'll just say
only 10.
There's a lot of like numbers floating around, so I can't remember which ones are which.
For sure.
Yeah, only 10 billion.
Only 10 billion.
Measly little $10 billion to go to Mars. Funny enough, plays into what it was I wanted to talk about, and I was like trying to bust out some research here, and I'm like, okay, I got to reevaluate this for a second. So there's a twist here. there's some shadow work going on. And so I'm going to give a couple little hints to tease for tomorrow. We're going to talk about game theory. We're going to talk about art of war. And we're going to reach back to a little bit more of the Elon Musk and President Trump feud. And I have got some really interesting angles and things to show you guys on that front. And I just want to point out, like, Eric said this right when I was like, what? And I was like, yep, there's more here. So we're going to talk about the more tomorrow. So thank you, Eric, for picking up on that. I hope you tune in tomorrow. And what time are we doing tomorrow, Troy?
I don't know.
Well, the live stream will be
right?
scheduled soon, probably the afternoon, right?
We'll schedule it today, hopefully, so that y'all know when we're going live tomorrow. 4th of July special. Yeah. So celebrating our freedom, celebrating the big, good, bad, and ugly bill. And
Absolutely. I would like to reiterate happy 4th of July to everybody. Of course, I know we'll be doing that amazing episode with Doug tomorrow, which I'm definitely excited for. And yeah, not to be overly a downer. I do think there's definitely plenty to celebrate about the passing of this big, beautiful bill. It may not be the most beautiful thing in the world, but it's definitely some steps in the right direction. Definitely some good coming out here. And then final iteration on for me is just make sure you pressure your congressman into passing that one subject at a time bill. Because again, when it comes to this sort of thing, for everybody who voted yes and everybody that voted no, you have no idea why they voted yes or no, because there's so many things in the bill. It's like, what did they vote yes for? What did they vote no for? You know, did they vote yes for lower taxes? They vote no on cuts? Did they, you know, it's just, there's so much there. It's such a harm, and I wish that it could be different. I wish that we could, more line it out one at a time and be able to go through these things one at a time and be a much better situation for everybody. But it is what it is at this exact moment, and it is a passable bill. It's passed, but it's also a passable bill. So that is what it is. Thank you all for joining in. Tune in again tomorrow for Doug's amazing analysis on the things that we probably completely missed when it comes to what's going on behind the scenes with this bill. And thank you to my amazing co-host for joining in with the Excel sheet analysis today. So
I want to also say thank you to everyone who joined in the live chat. Awesome conversation. Y'all are so encouraging, and we appreciate your comments.
Cool. All right. Bye-bye.